continue to learn about people and what they meant to others. When Grandma was in hospice care, I learned from my mom that Johnny, Grandma's nephew, came to visit her often and brought her flowers, which she was so proud of and she would brag to people about. And I just never knew that until then. We mean so many different things to different people, and the fabric of who we are is a quilt, a patchwork of both shared and unique memories and relationships with others. And in some ways, death brings all these patches together. I've been trying to think of memories to share of my grandma and my grandpa, memories that are just mine that might add some patches to the quilt. I basically grew up in their house. Every weekend during the school year and every day, more or less, during the summers, Mom took me and my sister to their house for lunch, and sometimes we could invite our friends to come with us. Grandma and Grandpa would make us lunch, which always included a sliced pickle, and we'd go downstairs and watch TV and eat lunch. Childhood friends of mine still talk about those lunches and the sliced pickles, and they remember how my grandparents treated them like their own grandkids. When the Spice World movie came out, anyone remember Spice World? Horrible, yeah. My mom couldn't stomach taking me, so Grandma stepped in, and she endured 2 hours of garbage acting and 90s pop music.
Garbage acting.
Grandma was a force of nature with kids and babies. When I was a teenager, I babysat my cousin's baby, and he would not stop screaming. And I've never been like super great with babies, till I had my own. Even then, it's debatable. But I didn't know what to do. And so I called Grandma, and she came over immediately and went into action. She was like pulling stuff out of her purse. She had her like wallet. She's dangling it in front of the baby's face. She's like talking a mile a minute, pulling out new things and jangling her keys. And of course, he stopped screaming immediately because he was like baffled by what is this woman doing? But she's just amazing. With my own children, she wasn't able to play as much as she would have wanted to. But she had a little basket with some toys in it, and she'd pull it out, she'd play ball with them in her living room. And both of them have said how much they loved playing with Gigi. That's what they called her. And their main association with her is play and toys. And I think that she would love that play is what they remember her for, even at her age. When my uncle got married, I remember being in awe at how beautifully Grandma and Grandpa danced together up on stage. Years later, a college boyfriend and I needed to learn to dance for a wedding, so I asked Grandma and Grandpa to teach us. We went to their house and they put on Frank Sinatra. They coached us and they showed us the right stances, how to lead, how to follow, some basic footwork. Grandpa joked about how the man shouldn't pump his arm up and down too much. He made kind of a silly demonstration of what that looked like. I'm sure many of you can visualize them. Grandpa with his kind of goofy mock seriousness and his smirk and his like button-down shirt tucked into his pants with his belt, even like just lounging at home. And Grandma scoffing and making self-deprecating jokes. And both of them in their boisterous laughs as they danced around their living room. Grandma was a great cook. She wrote me out some of her recipes, and I saw there's one of her recipes in the brochure program. Thank you, not brochure. That was the brochure before. And sometimes I'd call her on the phone because I wanted her to help me talk me through a recipe. And she'd tell me how to do it, and sometimes she would skip over some key steps, which is a little chaotic when you're in the middle of making something. But it was very classic Grandma, kind of getting 12 steps ahead of herself. Of course, I never would have told her this. I just kind of figured it out. I learned later, Grandma told me that she actually didn't really like cooking that much. It was more of just an expectation growing up. And she told me she'd actually have much rather been the one doing the cleaning up instead of the cooking. One day in grad school, I'd had a bad interaction with a professor, and Grandma sent me a legit sympathy card, like sending my deepest sympathies kind of sympathy card, which was pretty funny, and also like kind of put things in perspective a little bit. Speaking of sympathies, there's a photo of me hugging Grandma the Christmas right after my dad died. Sorry. And I just remember that hug so vividly. She was quiet, she was weepy, and I just knew in that moment how deeply she understood and empathized with the grief of losing a parent too young, in a way that few people around me did at that time, and even now, to some extent. About a year before she died, I asked Grandma some questions to learn more about her life before I knew her. I asked her what sounds she remembered waking up to as a child. She said that it was pretty quiet in Cle Elum. There were no cars or traffic noise, and her mom would be up before her dad usually. I asked her what day in her life she would have wanted to relive, and she said the day her mom died. Her siblings and her aunt and dad were with her mom in Seattle, and they called and asked if she could come up. Her mom said she had to go to the bathroom, and then the doctor came out and she was gone. She wished that she could relive that day to be able to see her mom one more time, and she wished that her mom had gotten to meet Doug. She said as a kid, she stayed out of trouble mostly because she didn't want to cause her mom too much stress. She knew that her mom wasn't well, but her dad never told them really how little time her mom had. And I learned from this conversation how much she adored her mom and how much she still missed her so many years later. I asked her what made her realize Grandpa was the one she wanted to be with. And she said he didn't say a lot and he was quiet, but he knew a lot of things. And when her mom died and he got the call at work, he came straight home. She said girls in Cle Elum told her she could have gotten anyone, why Skip? And she laughed when telling this to me, and she said, don't think I got a bad deal. He was a good man. And a side note, Grandpa always had these funny quips when Grandma was like sniping at him about something or the other, which happened a lot. He'd call her like my bride, or talk about however many years of wedded bliss. Sometimes he'd act all like kerfuffle, and he'd be like, well, I gotta get a divorce, right? But man, he adored her. And I just hope that all of us in this room are so lucky at some point in our lives to have someone in our lives love us as much as Grandpa just absolutely adored Grandma. I asked Grandma what her favorite song was or music that made her happy when she heard it, and she said the classical music that Grandpa used to play, Beethoven and Mozart. I asked her what the biggest change was in her lifetime, and this one's pretty funny. She said women wearing pants, which is actually very huge. It's like, wow, that is pretty, yeah. I asked her what the most significant historical moment was that she lived through, and she said the bombing of Pearl Harbor and when the U.S. entered the war, and she described how they listened in on the radio to the president speaking about it. Grandma and Grandpa saw so many changes in their lifetimes, political ones, social ones, and huge tectonic foundational shifts in their own lives and family. Some people might have coped through anger or bitterness, but Grandma and Grandpa coped, I think, from what I could see from my limited perspective, through abundant and infinite love. They nurtured and cherished their relationships with their children and grandchildren and their community. They always sought opportunities to help others, to consider the needs and the humanity of those less fortunate. They treated people with dignity, even when they disagreed, like the time Grandpa invited, I think, a Jehovah's Witness in for like just a casual chat. Even though
they became friends.
They became friends, exactly.
They drop back in all the time.
We saw him at a restaurant once, and he's like, Grandpa has this conversation with them. They held on to the threads of the past without dwelling there, and they remained ever and always open to the future. Many of us in this room carry parts of Grandma and Grandpa within us. Whenever Eric laughs, I hear my grandparents' big laughs that filled up a room and made everyone around them smile. In my mom, I see their generosity and their fierce loyalty to friends and family. My sewing skills were all taught to me by Grandma and many of my favorite recipes. Nearly all of the grandkids and great-grandkids have memories of playing on the piano at their house. They touched all of our lives in funny and wonderful and beautiful ways and have shaped the fabric of who we are. I feel immensely fortunate that my life was woven together with theirs. Thank you all for coming and for sharing in their life and in ours.